No, I think it's
DJ.
Hey, everybody. It's Dan Harris. Thanks for tuning in to our Tuesday waiver wire discussion with me and Kyle Yates. This is the second time Yates and I have had to talk for like an hour on the day. So
Had to
is correct. It is our quote unquote job that we have to do. Yeah, we recorded our podcast earlier today. So today we're going to be talking about our waiver wire pickups. We're going to be talking about our top 10. Then we're going to answer some of your questions. So you can go ahead, put them in your questions. We've also seen a bunch of players that have been, coming up frequently in questions. So we're going to just be generally talking about those players after we go through our top 10 waiver wire pickups. But Yates, there is a giant NFL story that is happening this morning. Broke right before we were podcasting this morning, but we've got to talk about the COVID-19 situation. I have been doing a chat on Reddit and we had our podcast, so I have not been following it quite as closely, but this is what I understand. Yates, you correct me if I am wrong. There is what I'll call an outbreak among the Titans. I think it's 3 players and multiple staff have been infected. The Titans have basically been told that they cannot go to the team facility until at least Saturday. I think that's what the latest is, which means they are not going to get to practice at all this week. If they are going to play a game against the Steelers this weekend, it probably matters how widespread the outbreak is. I saw Dr. Chow doing something on Twitter about whether or not it's in the same position group or not, as to whether or not they're actually going to be able to play separately, because there was an outbreak with the Titans. Their opponent from this past weekend, the Vikings, they also are not in the facility today, as they do some contact tracing with them, just regular testing, not even contact tracing with them. And I believe they play the Texans this weekend, Yates. So let's talk about a couple of things. Okay. Number one, right now, as we sit here on a Tuesday, let's say we don't have any further answers before tonight when a lot of waivers run in various leagues. What do you do if you have, especially the running backs? You've got Derrick Henry, you've got Dalvin Cook, you've got James Conner. What are you doing in that situation? I mean, if you're there and we don't know, are you just targeting running backs off your waiver wire or what?
Well, I think the thing that we have to keep in mind with this is that this is not going to simply just cancel these games, right? The Titans and the rest of these opponents, the Vikings, they will make up these games at some point during the season. So essentially, it gets viewed as a bye week. If they do miss this week, right, they'll just replace their bye week with this one, and then shift the schedule around. So that's the way that we need to be looking at it, with specifically someone like Justin Jefferson, who we're going to talk about here, who I really like as a wide receiver from the Minnesota Vikings as my number 1 wide receiver waiver pickup. Like, he's someone that you might bump down if you need someone this week, because there are concerns about whether or not he's going to be available. Now, to answer your question about if you have the players that are involved in this matchup of Derrick Henry, potentially James Conner with Pittsburgh, who the Titans play this week, Dalvin Cook, like, if you have those running backs, then you might need to prioritize some of these other guys who are on the waiver. So if Carlos Hyde is available and you have the number 1 waiver priority and you have Derrick, any of those running backs, great. Go after Carlos Hyde, because he's going to be starting this next week, most likely. If you are playing in a fab budget system or anything like that, then you need to be prepared to spend a little bit more than you probably would to ensure that you have options to roll this week. So it's a fluid situation. We won't have word on this probably until Saturday. Like we won't have word on this for quite a while, most likely. So we have to play it by ear. It's a fluid situation, but as waivers run, we need to be ready.
Yeah, I think that that's really what I'd be thinking about right now. I think you have to play it right now, as if especially if you have a Titans player or if you have a Steelers player, that you have to assume that the game is going to be canceled. Okay. So I'm not actually expecting it to be canceled right now. I have absolutely no idea. But with your waivers, I think that's how you need to operate, because I think you need to be better safe than sorry. So if you're going to be short on running back, we were joking about it on the podcast, Yates. I have a league where I have Derrick Henry and I have James Conner. I also, by the way, have David Johnson in that league. Add in a little Jonnu Smith. I'm in a lot of trouble. I'm going to be looking for this week waiver wires as if I'm going to need to replenish those options for guys that are much better short term than they are long term. So, okay, with that said, let's get into our waiver wire rankings. Then we'll hit some questions. Then we'll hit some players that are being asked about a lot. So, yeah, start us off here. Who is your number one pickup this week? If, you can factor in, of course, what you want with the situation that we've got with COVID, but overall, who's your number one pickup?
Yeah, of course. It's Carlos Hyde, running back for the Seattle Seahawks, with Chris Carson getting tangled up in that play towards the end of the game against the Cowboys. He is dealing with a knee sprain, most likely out 1 to 2 weeks. I expect him. We talked about this on the podcast on Monday, Dan, and you brought this up that their bye is in 2 weeks, right? Or 3 weeks, excuse me. So you could have Chris Carson sit this next week. And then it might be, if he's close to playing, it might be smart for them to just say, we'll sit you. We'll sit you, let you rest throughout the bye week. We can get by with Carlos Hyde, with DJ Dallas, Travis Homer, the running backs that we have available to us. And then we'll get Chris Carson back after the bye week. So I think Carlos Hyde is not only just a 1 week rental right now, he could be a 2 week rental, and he's got great matchups against Miami and then Minnesota.
Correct.
Off the top of my head. So I think Carlos Hyde is in a great chance to produce, and he could even be someone that, like, I ranked him at 19 right now for the week against Miami. I could see that he could end up higher than that based on this matchup and how many points are going to be going up on the board for Seattle. So Carlos Hyde at the number one waiver priority spot for me.
Yeah, I think Hyde sort of is the perfect example of how I think you need to be viewing the waiver wire at this stage of the game. And what that is especially for running backs, as I said on the podcast, running backs I view in much more heavily weighted to the short term. There is very little chance that Carlos Hyde is going to have long-term value this year for several reasons. Number one, Chris Carson's injury is not serious. As bad as that looked, by the way, not serious at all. Like Yates said, he has the bye in 3 weeks. So I'm sure they're going to rest Carson through the bye. It just makes sense, give him extra time. Once he comes back, there's very little chance that Carlos Hyde is going to factor in, particularly because, as you mentioned yesterday, Yates, Rashad Penny coming back off the PUP, he'll probably be back at that point. For this week, it's a good start. I have not done my week 4 rankings yet. I do that tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. So I haven't ranked him, but as a top 24 back, probably. I think the one thing is that I think it's doubtful that Hyde is going to factor into the passing game. He never has in his career. He's got a couple of catches here. And Russ is cooking, and that's kind of what they're doing. And they should win pretty handily, although their defense is terrible, and Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to throw completely. So, I'm not sure how much Hyde is factoring in. Is your number 2 Jeff Wilson?
No, my number 2 overall is still Justin Jefferson.
Okay, so hold on. Before we go there, then, how much of a difference is there? Because Wilson is still technically my number 1, but he's my 1A to Hyde's 1B. I don't have a strong preference. Do you have a strong preference if you're looking for running back for Hyde over Wilson?
I do, actually. And it's because of the matchup. Now, they're both in the same boat where they are not long-term solutions moving forward, right? Carlos Hyde for the reasons that you mentioned, but Jeff Wilson for Raheem Mostert coming back into the lineup here. Probably not this week. I don't expect him to play. I think it's a long shot. But next week, quite possibly. So then you're looking at maybe Jerick McKinnon we don't have any word on his injury just yet. So Jeff Wilson, his long-term availability, probably not anything more than a week or two. And looking at the matchup, it's Jeff Wilson, who just went 12 for 15 on the ground. Yes, he found the end zone a couple of times and contributed through the air. I'm not going to take that away from him, but yet 12 for 15 is not inspiring confidence against the New York Giants run defense, right? So, and now he gets Philadelphia and that Eagles run defense, which is a stout unit. So I'm playing the matchup game here, and I'm looking at who can be a top end contributor for me right away. Carlos Hyde this week, like I mentioned, probably around RB20, maybe even higher. Jeff Wilson against Philadelphia with Nick Mullins most likely at quarterback. Not going to be anything more than like RB30 for me.
Yeah, I think all of that is fair. Again, I still have Wilson a little bit ahead for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know if Jerick McKinnon is going to play, but Tags, when we were talking about the two of them last week, did bring up, like, are you sure even McKinnon's going to be able to survive the game? And sure enough, he's just not built to take a lot of punishment. So I don't think even if he does play, is going to factor in. And I agree, it doesn't sound like Raheem Mostert's going to play. So he is going to be the guy, and he does factor into the passing game somehow, surprisingly, as he did last week. The Philadelphia defense, it is a solid run defense, but you saw Darrell Henderson, in week 2, be able to take advantage of them. So I'm not running away from them completely to say you have to avoid this. For me, Wilson and Hyde, I admit, and this, I guess, kind of goes against almost what I was saying and how you need to value, running backs. I do think I'll probably rank Hyde higher than Wilson this week, but I do still have Wilson as my top guy to the extent they're both 20% of FAB guys to me. I'm fine with that if you need a running back, because I do think Wilson is going to be startable this week, and I do think he's got a much better chance of being usable long-term. So the combination of it for me slightly puts him ahead of Hyde, because I do think both are going to be usable. What's your FAB percentage on both of those guys?
Well, I was just going to ask you, I have it around the same, where it's 20% for Carlos Hyde, 15 for Jeff Wilson. But if you are facing Dalvin Cook, the uncertainty, surrounding Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, James Conner, if you're in that situation, how much are you willing to spend to acquire Carlos Hyde this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is we just don't know what's happening right now. Let's talk about the league that I just mentioned, where I legitimately have my running backs: Derrick Henry, James Conner, David Johnson. That's a bad situation to be in. Okay, I mean, I'm going to be down at that point. If Jeff Wilson is out there, if Carlos Hyde is out there, I got to go get him. I need to do what I need to do. And so you always point this out. You're like, well, if you need a running back, spend what you need to spend. I don't really think there's a limit in that scenario, especially if you're in, you're 1-2, you're 0-3, you need to win. Do what you need to do. If you're not 100% desperate, where you're not like, oh my God, I desperately need to do something, I have to start a running back, then I'm at the 20% range. But yeah, the numbers that we throw out, it's a great point by you, Yates. The numbers that we throw out are completely irrelevant if you're in a situation where you're like, I can't start a running back. I have no running backs. I need a body. Go out and spend whatever you need to get them. So I'm with you. In a vacuum, though, with you there, I'm 20% on both guys. Okay, let's go to Jefferson now, because he's your number 2 pickup of the week, right?
Yeah, and I think the uncertainty could shift it where I'd move him to 3, but he's still going to be my number 1 wide receiver, where I would move Jeff Wilson up to 2. So I think it depends on what do you need for the wide receiver spot on your roster. Do you need a contributor this week? Then I might not be willing to spend more than 10 to 15% on Justin Jefferson. I still want him on my roster, but yet if I have to spend up because I need someone this week, Jefferson's not your guy, because we just don't know if the Vikings are even going to play this week. So that would be a terrible situation for me to recommend, hey, go spend 20 to 25% of your FAB. Oh, wait, you can't use Justin Jefferson this week. You probably should have gone with a different option. So there's context surrounding all of these guys that we're talking about. So I want Justin Jefferson on my roster moving forward, because he broke out in a big way. He was one of my favorite receivers. I actually had him rated above CeeDee Lamb and Jalen Reagor in this draft class coming out. Loved his talent. And so for him to break out this way, I was like, yes, here we go. Let's go. So I'm buying into it. I want him on my roster, but again, it comes with context. Do I need the long-term stash, the long-term solution and play? Then I'll go get Justin Jefferson. But again, not for anything more than 15 to 20%.
If you do need a short-term play, okay, you're struggling at wide receiver, you need somebody who you think you want to start this week. Out of curiosity, who is your guy? Because we talked about it on the podcast yesterday, and Tags was all like, well, if you really need somebody just to go, I mean, why not just get Cole Beasley and get him in there and make him your top priority? If you needed somebody for this week, who would be your top priority?
Yeah, if I needed someone this week, I'm still rolling with Keelan Cole.
Okay.
Keelan Cole up against Cincinnati. And this is a matchup that I expect Gardner Minshew to bounce back from what he put up on last Thursday. That's not the typical Gardner Minshew that we've seen. So I'm expecting a bounce back. I think that Keelan Cole, even if Chark plays, I still think he's a fine option. He's seen enough targets to be relevant. He can be plugged in as a wide receiver 3, and he's got the talent. He's always had the talent. So now he's got the opportunity. I'm buying in. So I'll go with Keelan Cole there. But again, I think no one is going to be sitting in your league going like, oh yeah, I've got to go spend a ton of money to go secure Cole Beasley, right? So you can go in 10% of your FAB, if that, to go get Cole Beasley, and you can plug him in. If John Brown misses this week, he's an excellent play. Even if John Brown does play, he's still a great play, because this offense is ridiculous right now. You've got to buy into the pieces. So I think that's what you can do. You can go out and get Cole Beasley for cheap and plug him in. He's my number 7 wide receiver this week, but I can move him up.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not telling you to move him up. You're fine. But I think, by the way, the way you described it like that, that is why it changes in the way I look at running back versus the way I look at wide receiver. Running back is very much like near term dominates the long term. For wide receiver, I don't care that much about the short term because I do think there are so many options that are available. Like Cole Beasley, like you said, you can pick him up and plug him in, and he's not going to cost you anything in Fab. That's why the number one guy for me on my pickup, my top two for the week are Jeff Wilson and Carlos Hyde, very much 1A and 1B. We'll call him my third, not a 1C, is Alshon Jeffery, who I don't necessarily expect to play this week against San Francisco. He got unlimited practices last week. And then he has a brutal schedule, as we talked about yesterday on the podcast. He's got at Pittsburgh, home against Baltimore. Although, as we saw against Baltimore last night, maybe they can be exploited, but maybe that's only by Patrick Mahomes. However,
I was about to say,
I know, I get
Carson Wentz at this point, maybe not the same as Patrick Mahomes.
Slightly worse. But I think part of it is they really have no other options, and he has been the type of guy who plays like a wide receiver too, going forward when he is in there. And I do think that if he's healthy, he is a guy who you can start pretty much each and every week. So even if it's not for this week, he is a guy who I think that you can start essentially going forward if you're struggling at wide receiver. So for me, that's the guy I'm going after, even if I'm not really going to be able to play him over the next couple of weeks. Now, I want to ask you about a guy because we talked about this on the podcast. My number 4 guy is not on your radar for a pickup, and that's Brandon Aiyuk. He is not a guy who you're targeting this week, right? Why don't you tell everybody why?
Yeah, so Brandon Aiyuk is going to be a hot waiver wire ad, and I'm just not buying in. And the reasoning is that this is a low passing volume offense, and you are going to have George Kittle coming back into the lineup soon, Deebo Samuel coming back into the lineup soon. The issue is that if you are picking up Brandon Aiyuk, you most likely need him to be a contributor right away, and he's going up against Philadelphia this week. We talked about it with Jeff Wilson. It's not a great matchup, but then you have Darius Slay, who just shut down AJ Green and has been a shutdown corner. He's one of the most underrated corners in the entire NFL. He was buried, like from a national perspective, was buried in Detroit. He's now in Philadelphia, getting his name recognition that he deserves. I think that he can simply look at Brandon Aiyuk and say, and this 49ers offense, and just say, I'll shadow Aiyuk, I'll shut him down, and make Nick Mullins beat us somewhere else. And I don't know if they're going to be able to. So I think Brandon Aiyuk this week, I'm not super excited about. I could be wrong. Been wrong about a few other players this year and totally owning up to that.
No, you haven't.
Totally owning up to the fact that I can absolutely miss. But just for me, with the resources that I have on my roster, I don't know if I want to go chasing after someone who has like immediate appeal or that he's going to fade away from his immediate appeal because of Deebo Samuel and George Kittle coming back into the lineup, who are going to dominate the targets. Doesn't leave a ton left over for Brandon Aiyuk. So you need him this week, and it's not a great matchup. So I'll let someone else spend up. I'll let someone else deal with the potential range of outcomes.
Okay, and where do you have him in your wide receiver pickups for this week ranked in waiver wire?
I have him at 9.
Okay, all right. So you've moved him up a tiny bit, I think, since we first spoke, which is fine. He is my second wide receiver pickup and 4th overall. Slay is very tough. You've seen that the sort of negative reputation that he got from last year was really not particularly earned, and he's played well so far this year. But I think what you saw with Aiyuk is that when he's fully healthy, as he is right now, the 49ers are going to find ways to get him involved because they have one of, if not the best offensive mind as their coach in Shanahan. He scored on a rushing touchdown, not a passing touchdown, but he got plenty of targets. And I know Nick Mullins is not somebody who you can, write home about, but he's a capable quarterback who can get you the ball. Maybe George Kittle plays this week. I would expect it, but their running game is still not great. Again, probably Wilson is going to be leading the way. It's not like they can just have this 4-headed rushing attack that they could have had at the beginning of the season. So I do think Deebo Samuel is not going to play. And I'm not even long-term. That's also part of what it is. When you blend the short-term, and again, like I said, I look more long-term. I'm just fading Deebo Samuel. I'm not expecting.
It's fair.
I've said it from the start. Okay. It's a Jones fracture, by the way. It's a very, very tricky injury. So it is something where I'm just not really getting that close into it. To be fair, Alshon Jeffery has a Lisfranc injury or had one. So that's also a tricky injury. But with Deebo Samuel, I was fading him before the season started, fading him now. So I think you can get Aiyuk. I think they're going to be creative in how they get him the ball. So for me, he's 4th. Justin Jefferson, to be clear, is my 5th. So I like Jefferson, and he's very close with Aiyuk and pretty close with Jeffrey. Those are a clear top 3 for me. Those are the 3 guys who I'm going after. All right, Yates. So go through for me now, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. Your top 5 waiver wire guys. Have we touched on them all for the
Overall.
week? Overall for the week.
Yeah, I've got Carlos Hyde 1, Justin Jefferson 2, Jeff Wilson, Keelan Cole, and then Alshon Jeffery.
Okay. So I haven't given my thoughts on Keelan Cole. There are a couple of things. Number one, I think is fine pickup. I was disappointed, of course, against Miami. I think he needs DJ Chark because I don't think he's built to be the guy getting the passing game. Although, frankly, their game plan was terrible. They barely involved Shenault, and all the creativity that we saw with Shenault was just out the window. Might have been because they were expecting Chark to play. I have been working under the assumption that Chark is just going to play this weekend for sure. But we did have that weird report that he is still, quote, undergoing testing. I haven't seen anything today. I don't know what that testing was. Hopefully he's fine. I think either way, Cole makes a fine pickup with or without Chark, but he's not somebody who I'm really going after necessarily. Go to number 6 here, Yates. Who do you have next?
Well, I was looking up DJ Chark to see
have
if
you seen anything?
Some news. I was looking it up and I moved off the list. I have T. Higgins at number 6.
Really? Okay. So what do you, I mean, he had a big game, but what do you expect from Higgins going forward?
So part of this, I was just thinking about this too. Part of this and my reasoning for ranking these guys is also based on my work from a dynasty perspective and scouting this incoming class. So you'll see Justin Jefferson, I was super high on. So that means that now that he finally got the opportunity, I'm going to buy in. T. Higgins, I was pretty high on as well. So he's got the opportunity now. I'm going to buy in. Brandon Aiyuk, I wasn't a huge fan of coming out of college. So that's why I might have him a little bit down. So T. Higgins, though, incredibly talented. He is seeing like he's now what even wide receiver number do you want to put it? Like, is he above AJ Green at this point?
Well, that's a good point. You can't be buying all the Bengals wide receivers, right? Unless we do think Joe Burrow is going to be throwing it like 60 times a game.
Right.
So how do you feel generally about the Bengals wide receivers then?
Well, it was with T. Higgins, the concern was John Ross, that they were splitting snaps. John Ross, healthy and active, healthy scratch. He's done. He's done in Cincinnati. You don't like scratch someone who's a high first round pick unless you are absolutely done with them. So T. Higgins is the future. He was drafted with the 33rd overall pick in this draft. So the Bengals have a plan for him long term, and it's not necessarily only that he's AJ Green's replacement, long-term replacement. He can be utilized this year. So as far as a target perspective, I'm not willing to go so far now to say that T. Higgins is suddenly the wide receiver 2 in this offense above AJ Green. I'm not yet. AJ Green is still seeing a ton of targets. It was a tough matchup last week. I'm not willing to say that. But in an offense where they are not going to feature the tight end, Drew Sample, 1 target last week after, being a guy who was hyped up on the waiver wire last week. So it's just not an offense that runs through the tight end traditionally. They're going to focus on their wide receivers, and T. Higgins got wide open in the end zone, but that's not how he just makes it. He is a fantastic contested catch specialist downfield. He can make the big plays. So I want to buy into that, and I want pieces of this, but then also you can plug him in this week against Jacksonville. It's a fine matchup.
Yeah, I'm not quite as willing to buy into Higgins right now, just because I do think there are better days ahead for AJ Green, and I do think there are even better days ahead. I mean, Boyd had a nice game, but I think both guys are going to be pretty solid starts going forward, and I just don't think there's room for all 3 of them to basically have that. So that I'm not avoiding Higgins as a pickup. I think I have him 10th or 11th overall, so he's fine. I mean, he's a guy you can pick up, but more of a long-term play. Who's 7 for you, Yates?
It's Rex Burkhead, but this is the territory where we're like,
we talk now.
So Rex Burkhead, I'm putting there though within my top 10 because I know that there are still some running back needy teams who are going to miss out on the top guys of Carlos Hyde and Jeff Wilson. So Rex Burkhead, if you need to start this next week, I think there are worse options, but yet, there's always the possibility that James White rolls up to the facility on Thursday, comes back from this family tragedy that he's been dealing with, and Rex Burkhead's value goes away completely. Right. There's a possibility that Damian Harris comes back off of IR this week. Right. And now Rex Burkhead is suddenly a healthy scratch. We don't know with the Patriots running back. We've never known what the situation is with these running backs. So Rex Burkhead, he's a fine ad for cheap if you are absolutely in need of a running back, but I don't know if there really are many other options that I'm super confident in outside of Carlos Hyde and Jeff Wilson this week.
Yeah, if James White doesn't come back this week, I do think Burkhead is probably going to be a guy who you can get in there as a flex play just because they're going to need to pass the ball to keep up with Kansas City dump offs are going to be there. I think Burkhead's going to be good. And Burkhead has been good when he's healthy, but it is just an incredibly crowded backfield. And that's just what it is. And there, as we joke, there's a goal line back. His name is Cam Newton. That's really hard for Burkhead to have too much value. All right, then go through your 8, 9, and 10. And I assume whoever it is, like, you're just like, doesn't really matter to me at this point, because we're at the Burkhead point where we're basically like, doesn't really matter to me. So I imagine nobody else matters to you that much.
I mean,
who are good?
Not necessarily. Tre'Quan Smith is someone that I have at 8. So I think you can add him. I don't know if I'm necessarily super confident in starting him just yet, but with the role that he's carved out for himself on this roster, if you're in need of wide receiver, I think you can roll him in. Eric Ebron, I have at 9, and I'm just including him there because of people who might need a tight end this week. Eric Ebron, if Deontay Johnson misses this game with his potential concussion, I think Ebron saw 7 targets last week, and he's growing, into a role in this offense. So, and he's getting end zone targets. And so if there are, if you're in tight end, I think you can roll out Eric Ebron and be fine. And then Greg Ward, we talked about kind of the same rationale with Alshon Jeffery, but because, hey, guess what? The Eagles need wide receiver help.
Right.
And so with Dallas Goedert now going to miss a couple weeks here with an ankle injury, ankle fracture, actually, that won't require surgery. Excuse me. So that's not great. So we're looking at Greg Ward, 11 targets last week. That's a solid day. And so looking at this matchup against San Francisco, Carson Wentz is going to need help. And I think that he's going to lean on Greg Ward over the middle of the field and Zach Ertz. So I'm willing to roll out Greg Ward, and he's 0.7% owned. Like, it's ridiculous. So you can get Greg Ward super cheap.
Okay. So a couple of things I have to say. First, if you're watching this and you are enjoying it in any way, or you want to give Yates a shout out for basically powering through his sickness still, go ahead and click the like button. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, just click the subscribe button. Helps us out, makes us feel loved. Second, I want to get into a couple of other players here who I've seen questions about and people are asking about. So they're on our waiver wire list. You can tell me where you have them ranked, or you can just give me your general thoughts on them going forward. How about Scotty Miller? Now, this is a guy who kind of, he dropped a touchdown pass in the game. Chris Godwin was out. He was a prime start in week 2, dropped the touchdown pass. Tom Brady was like, I'm done with you for the rest of the game. But he did bounce back last week. Chris Godwin, we don't know the exact extent of his hamstring injury, but he is thought to be out multiple weeks. They're against the Chargers this week with Miller, so it's not a great matchup. But how do you view Miller, knowing that not only might he be a guy who can start this week because there just aren't that many other options there, but also a guy who might have longer-term value if Chris Godwin needs to miss more time, which it sounds like he will.
Yeah, so Scotty Miller, I'm not necessarily super excited about him this week against the Chargers. And then next week he gets Chicago. So it's another tough matchup for him. I think that he's going to be fine from a target perspective. And so I wrote a player note for him earlier today saying, like, hey, you can roll him in as a flex option in full PPR leagues. I think he'll be fine for you. But he's nothing more than that. I'm not going out and saying like, oh man, I really need to get Scotty Miller, because I think he's going to be a top, 36 option for me at the wide receiver position this week. I just don't see that happening. Yep. So I'm not super excited about Scotty Miller, but again, if you're desperate, I think you can pick him up.
So I have him a little higher than you do. I will make it clear. There is a top 5 pickup this week: Jeff Wilson, Carlos Hyde, Alshon Jeffery, Brandon Aiyuk, and Justin Jefferson for me. Once you are past that, I just don't care. Like, there is nobody who's blowing my socks off or anything like that. But I do have Miller 6th, and I do think it's for a couple of reasons. If you're going to give me, the matchups aren't great. We were talking before, we started, because they've got the Chargers, who have 3 really good cornerbacks, but Chris Harris Jr. now is out for what is thought to be a month. You didn't see Scotty Miller play in the slot all that much. About a third of his snaps came in the slot in week 2. So he's probably not going to be able to take advantage of that completely. And they do have 2 good corners. So it's not a great matchup. But I do think when you've got the second wide receiver in a Tom Brady-led offense, other than week 2 where he really disappointed, Brady has a chemistry with him. He seems to trust him. He is producing. He's a guy who I would be willing to roll with, both because I think you can probably get away with starting him. I was pretty bullish on Scotty Miller in my week 2 rankings. That didn't exactly work out. So I think he's probably going to be more in the 40s. Again, I had him more in like the mid 30s with him in week 2, but I think he's going to be in the 40s this week. A guy you can start maybe as your flex, but I can't imagine that this injury is anything less than certainly a multiple week injury for Godwin. For Godwin. It's a hamstring. It's a soft tissue injury. The poor guy's already been banged up. They don't have their bye till late, so we're going to have to see how that goes. But they do have Chicago. Green Bay is not the best matchup either, which comes after them. But
I'll say this too, with Miller, it's going to be interesting where they play him because Justin Watson's dealing with his own injuries too.
True.
We don't know his status for this upcoming week. So I don't really know who else they have on that roster. Is Tyler Johnson still on that roster? No idea. So
I actually don't even know. Correct.
Right.
But Rob Gronkowski is still there. Fire up some Rob Gronkowski for you. No.
So this is, I think you actually can.
What? I was joking.
His snap percentages have gone up. He actually went from, let me see if I can get this right. I tweeted this out earlier, like 73% in week 1 to 69% in week 2, which Gronk approves. And then 93% last week.
Yeah.
So his snap percentages have skyrocketed. I think without with this uncertainty of, where does Scotty Miller play? Who else is going to suit up at wide receiver? This could be a Gronk and OJ Howard game, along with Mike Evans. So Scotty Miller doesn't really have much of a ceiling.
It was good to see Gronk get more involved last week. They clearly made a point to get on the ball. Another guy we've been getting a lot of questions about is Andy Isabella. He filled in for Christian Kirk. He got 4 targets, caught them all, got 2 touchdowns. Is Isabella a guy? Because, a lot of people have been, being like, why is Isabella so low in your waiver wire rankings this week? Do you think that he has a role carved out if Christian Kirk is healthy? Do you think he has a defined role? Definitely you want to get him out there if Christian Kirk is not healthy.
So it was really funny on Sunday morning, my live stream, I got a question about Andy Isabella. And I was like, looking at DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to see his 10 plus targets. Like Larry Fitzgerald should see, a significant number of targets. That didn't work out for some reason. But then, but I was like, Andy Isabella, probably not going to see more than 4 to 5 targets. And guess what? That's what he got. But yeah, he turned them into 2 freaking touchdowns. So and we talked about this earlier on the podcast. I am more willing from a fantasy perspective to buy into target volume than ridiculous touchdown efficiency. Yep. So Andy Isabella has always had the speed, the talent to be able to take any pass. He's kind of like a Mecole Hardman. Like that's kind of the range that we need to be looking at Andy Isabella in, right? Like this guy who you could plug into your flex. And if he finds the end zone on a big play, you're going to be happy that you started him. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he's nothing more than a desperation play because if he's only getting 4 to 5 targets, he could end up easily with a 2 for 30 stat line and 0. And then at that point, you're like, why did I start Andy Isabella? So the potential range of outcomes here, as long as DeAndre Hopkins is on the field, the targets aren't going to go anywhere else, as far as significantly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I echo exactly what you said. He's just not a guy who I think, if you're in a really deep league, because a lot of people are like, well, I'm in a 20 team. Okay, sure. Great. That's totally fine to stash him there, but yeah, don't go crazy over the 2 touchdowns. Let's finish up before we get to questions. Let's finish up on, if there's one thing, Yates, that you and I have to discuss every time we are on a podcast or a live stream together, it is Colts. And we've got Michael Pittman Jr. We didn't know this at the time that we were recording, and you tweeted out the Anchorman, I'll say GIF, of that escalated quickly. You're welcome. With Pittman Jr., you had mentioned when we talked about it that he had gotten injured, and when you and I were just chatting, and I was like, yeah, but he caught a couple of passes in the 4th quarter. He's fine. And then he had this, whatever that compartment
leg syndrome.
Whatever it is. What that is. I think it happens when you get hit in the calf, and it sounds scary, but he had surgery and he's okay, but he's out for several weeks right now. We've also got Paris Campbell out. So let's talk about 2 guys who, we talked about them a little bit on the podcast yesterday, but not that much because we didn't know about the situation. Zach Pascal and Mo Alley Cox, who Tags has been completely buying into here. And now that we know that Pittman Jr. is out, I wouldn't be surprised to stick here in more of, maybe a 12 personnel, get more 2 tight ends on the field and see Cox. So why don't we start with Mo Alley Cox, because you mentioned Eric Ebron. How about Mo Alley Cox now with Pittman Jr. injured?
Yeah. With when I did my initial waiver wire rankings, this was before I knew about Pittman.
Yep.
And so I think I have Mo Alley Cox at 15 to begin with. I can bump him up into 11, 10. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to put him above Eric Ebron just yet, but and this is why, the matchup against Chicago, they just held Hayden Hurst in check. It's just not a great situation. Phillip Rivers, I don't want to go anywhere near Phillip Rivers this week against this Bears defense. So I'm not expecting a big day. from this Colts offense. And Zach Pascal against these Bears corners, it's not great. Zach Pascal is just a guy, in my opinion. He's not necessarily someone who you can feel confident rolling out there from a talent perspective. So this is just a game that I'm kind of just down on the Colts offense as a whole. But I mean, if you need someone, Mo Alley Cox can certainly take any pass and create a chunk gain out of it.
Well, talk to me about Pascal's long-term viability, because you assume Paris Campbell. I agree. Yeah, this week he's not somebody you want to go near. And again, Phillip Rivers does not look good. I was very much on I don't think Phillip Rivers is done train coming into the season, because I was like, look at that offensive line. Second half of the year, you felt like he was just getting better. Now he's got the great offensive line. He has not looked good, despite the fact that he completed whatever it was, 17 of 21 passes this past weekend. We liked Paris Campbell a lot, you especially, and now he's going to miss probably the majority of the season. Michael Pittman Jr. probably out until at least week 8. So there just aren't that many. You hate T.Y. Hilton, as we all know. There aren't that many options for Phillip Rivers to throw the ball to. And he is not going to throw the ball 21 times every single game. You mentioned Chicago. They've got Cleveland. They've got Cincinnati, then a bye, Detroit. He's going to have to throw. So do you think Pascal has long-term viability as a starter?
I mean, Chicago, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, I can see rolling him out against Cleveland or Cincinnati, but outside of that, I'm not super excited about him as anything more than a wide receiver 3. I think it's going to be one of the situations that if you roll him out, I think you can roll him out as a flex option against Chicago, but it's going to be one of those things that you don't want to watch that game. Like, just don't watch it. You're going to be like, just avoid it and then just look at the final score, because I think he'll be fine in like maybe even garbage time or whatever we want to call that. Like, as far as them playing catch up, because I do expect Phillip Rivers to turn the ball over a couple times in this one. So like, just not super excited. I don't think it's going to look pretty, but he could produce for you.
All right. So we're going to get into questions. I have a couple of names that our producer has been sending me that people have been asking about a lot. And then I will get into specific questions, but very quickly. So you don't have to spend a ton of time on it. Just give me your 20, 30-second outlook. How are you feeling about Darrell Henderson right now?
Oh, I love him.
You're like, but you're buying into this now, right? You're saying, this is the guy. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Very good. Is he like RB2? Rest is like an RB2, the rest of, not the RB2, of course,
right,
and RB2 rest of the season, you think?
Yeah, I think a low end RB2.
Yep, I agree. I know people are questioning it, but it's not just the role. He looks good. Watch the game. He looks really good. I'm not worried about Cam Akers.
I've always thought that he looked good. And that's why I criticized the Cam Akers pick in the draft. Was like, why on earth are you taking Cam Akers in the second round, who I thought was raw and more of an athlete than a refined running back prospect, when you have Darrell Henderson on the roster? So I think they could have waited, used that pick on an offensive lineman or whatever, and then grabbed another running back in the 4th or 5th round. I think that would have been the smarter play. At Cam Akers, even if he comes back, I don't think he's going to take away work from Darrell Henderson right now.
Yep. 100% agree. Buy into it completely. What America has been waiting for right now is back-to-back questions on Jets players. So let's get into it. Braxton Berrios, any interest whatsoever?
So I actually was forced in a dynasty league to play Braxton Berrios last week, and it worked out.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting that every single week.
No, you shouldn't be.
Anything more than like a low end wide receiver 4 in PPR leagues, like I'm not looking his way.
The answer is no. Le'Veon Bell as a stash right now, if he's out there, because he's out there in some leagues right now. Are you picking him up and stashing him?
So here's the interesting part with Le'Veon Bell is that I expect Adam Gase to be fired after Thursday's game.
I think that's a fair prediction.
So then who do they bring in as who's their offensive coordinator right now? Who do they bring in as their interim head coach? Maybe Greg Williams. Is he, whatever. So at that point, the situation with Bell has been, not only is it just a terrible offense in general, but it's been Adam Gase and his usage, like his, willingness or lack thereof of rolling out Le'Veon Bell and giving him the workload that he deserves. So if it's a different head coach, now that's suddenly kind of interesting, where you could get Le'Veon Bell super cheap, pick him up off of waivers, especially for these running back needy teams right now. And if it's a different head coach or different offensive coordinator, then they could be willing to lean more on Le'Veon Bell, and he could be a low end RB2 moving forward.
You know what else Adam Gase does? He runs the fewest plays basically in the NFL, right? They are a slow team and they don't have any desire to try to come back when they're behind.
So you're telling me they haven't hit the hyperdrive button?
No, I think they did, but the hyperdrive button for them is just sort of like the really, really slow button for every other team. Yeah, it's just whatever. Watch the Thursday night game. It'll be great. I agree with you. The Le'Veon Bell is a stash, regardless, even if Adam Gase were there. He's probably somebody you're going to be able to roll out, which I thought before coming into the season. But if Adam Gase was there after Thursday or into the next week, we all riot anyway. Okay, so we're going to get into specific questions here. I will call out the names of people. Keep them coming. We'll try to get to as many as we can and go rapid fire here. Again, if you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, just click the subscribe button. Really helps us out. And again, Tags does a live stream 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Sunday mornings. Yates does 12 p.m. to 1. Start sit. So you're really going to want to get in there. So again, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It really helps us out. Okay. From Luke Corsanita, I think, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Should I be worried about Kenyon Drake? A lot of questions in my Reddit chat today about Kenyon Drake. People are very worried. Are you, Yates?
It's fair. And I have, so in a lot of dynasty startups that I did this offseason, I have like Kenyon Drake and Joe Mixon as my main running backs, like everywhere, because I was like, this is going to be great. It'll be perfect. No, I'm not panicking yet. He's still getting the workload. And same with Joe Mixon. Like they're still getting the workload. Positive regression will happen for these guys. The touchdown numbers will bounce back. So I'm expecting good things moving forward. He's still getting the workload. So you just need to adjust your expectations. He's an RB2, for the foreseeable future, but he's still someone that you should be holding on to.
Yeah, I'll be on. I did not understand that people were upset about Kenyon Drake coming into like my Reddit. They were like Kenyon Drake. I was like, he's fine. Right. I get it's been a little disappointing, but he's going to be fine. So I agree with you. I'm not concerned about him. Martin Ramos, should I drop? I know your answer. Should I drop Evan Ingram for Eric Ebron or Dalton Schultz?
I would drop him for Eric Ebron right now. Evan Ingram, I just don't want to deal with the ups and downs that he has and the Giants offense. It's real bad. So I just don't want to deal with it. I'm fine rolling with a better offense than Eric Ebron.
You know what answer I'm going to give you? Whatever. Like you're in that range.
Just do whatever.
Do whatever. Yates yells at me. That's fine. I don't care. I don't have a strong feeling about Evan Ingram or Eric Ebron going forward. I really don't. My guess is I will have Evan Ingram in my rest of season rankings when I do a full sweep of them tonight. When I do the trade chart, which check out on FantasyPros, I'm going to have Ingram probably a spot or two higher. So overall, I'd probably hold Evan Ingram. But if you drop him for Eric Ebron and you have that sort of inclination, I don't have a problem with it. How about Schultz, though? Would you prefer Ingram to Schultz?
That's closer. I'll still go Schultz.
Okay, I'll go Ingram. But that's
do whatever.
Do whatever you want. Okay. Motrak Ianut. I don't know how to pronounce the name. Sorry about this. You love Justin Jefferson, but how do you feel if Allen Lazard is out there on the waiver wire and you could only pick up one?
With the uncertainty, I'll let the uncertainty be the tiebreaker there. I'll go with Allen Lazard. The issue with Lazard is that he loses his appeal once Devontae Adams comes back into the lineup. At that point, Lazard moves back to a flex option that you are hoping finds the end zone. Now, he can certainly always find the end zone because it's Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. So that's a possibility, but he's a touchdown dependent, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. So Justin Jefferson has an enormous ceiling moving forward in this offense as the arguable number 2 option. So, but with the uncertainty, if I need someone, I'll go with Lazard.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high.
Good matchup this week too against Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm not quite as high on Jefferson as you are. I still like him as a pickup, but for me, it's certainly Lazard. Lazard was a guy who I really liked. Tex, and I were joking about it. I really liked coming into the year. I like him even more now. He benefited from the lack of Devontae Adams on Sunday night, but he should be a guy who I think you're going to be able to roll out there as a flex. We're going to have different answers to this one from Rob K, and we mentioned it briefly. How much fab would you be willing to spend on Alshon Jeffery? For me, it is 15% because I do think that is a guy who, if he's out there at this point, I really want to add if I can. I'm not going to go crazy, but I do think he's a guy who could return in the end fully healthy, wide receiver 2 value by the end of the season. So for me, 15%. Yates, you're lower, correct?
I'm 10 to 15. I'm fine with that.
Okay, great. It's the Chad. Would you trade DJ Moore and Kenyon Drake for Ezekiel Elliott?
Sure.
I love it. Conviction from Yates.
Yeah.
This is why not? Yeah, do whatever you want. That's sort of our motto
that's a solid return on investment. I think,
Yep.
If you can get that trade, DJ Moore hasn't necessarily he's been getting the targets, but he hasn't done anything with it. And then Kenyon Drake, getting the carries. This is the week though that I want to roll out Kenny Drake against Carolina.
Wasn't it last week though, where you wanted to roll him out again? Everybody was really high on him.
Yeah, and he still put up a solid day. He just didn't find the end zone, right? Sure. So but this week against Carolina, like I'm expecting a big day.
And then we're going to follow that up with the Jets, just to be clear. So I'm not running out looking to trade Kenyon Drake, but again, I will do the trade chart tonight. Like legitimately, my first order of business when we are done with this live stream is to start writing that article. So I will have a firm answer for you, and you can check it. You can see it on my Twitter feed or go to Fantasy Pros when it's out in the morning. But yes, you should do that trade. You lock up Zeke. If you can at this point lock up Zeke or Alvin Kamara, you just do it. Roger Lodger. I don't know if that's pronounced. Should I accept the following trade? I was offered Christian McCaffrey and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So Christian McCaffrey by himself.
So Christian McCaffrey
for James Robinson and Tyler Boyd.
It depends.
Go ahead. Yes.
It depends on if you can afford to wait for Christian McCaffrey.
Yep.
If you have the depth that you can let go James Robinson and Tyler Boyd and still be fine, then you can get Christian McCaffrey to make a playoff push, then absolutely.
Yeah, I'm okay with making that trade for sure. I think my guess is that James Robinson and Tyler Boyd will be slightly higher in the trade chart when I'm done with it, but it's really tough when you have a guy with an injury like CMC does, who is out at least 2 more games, could be out up to 5 more games because you got the 4 to 6 week. So it's really tough. This is something where if you have depth and you are willing to wait it out, then you might as well do it, because this is probably not something that the Panthers are going nowhere. They're not going to rush him back or anything like that. I think they wait till he's fully healthy, and then he's going to be a monster. So if you can survive the next few weeks, you should. From CC, Cam Akers was dropped in my league. Is he worth a waiver wire pick?
It depends on who you would have to drop for him, and if you need running back depth. But right now, I'm not going out of my way to pick up Cam Akers.
This weekend is when I fully changed my opinion on the Rams backfield. I still had Akers was the guy. Eventually he's going to take it. Don't worry so much. I can't imagine. But we said in week 2, when we were talking about who to pick up, Darrell Henderson, and in week 1 with Malcolm Brown, you pick these guys up, even though we may not be like, yes, this is your guy. If they do manage to put together another week like they did the previous week, then they can run with it. And Henderson did it. So I think this is Henderson's backfield. I'm okay with dropping it in a redraft league. X, the chosen one X. Don't blame me. Should I trade Nick Chubb for David Johnson plus Stephon Diggs?
Nick Chubb to David Johnson is a massive downgrade, in my opinion. but Stephon Diggs has been playing out of his mind.
Yeah.
So if you have running back depth and you can afford to take that downgrade, but then you are shallow at wide receiver and you need some help there, then that's the situation I would make that trade. Otherwise, I'm staying put with Nick Chubb.
Yeah, that's basically exactly how I feel. I'm trying to figure out where that's going to rank on the trade chart. And my guess is that's basically going to be an even deal. I think it's fine. I think David Johnson is a guy you can definitely roll out there. It's a massive downgrade, as you said, from Chubb. But he is a guy, remember the Texans. Buy your Texans. They've had just a terrible start to the season with defenses. It gets easier. So I do think David Johnson is a guy you can roll out there. And Stephon Diggs, just great. So I think it's pretty much of an even trade. Tommy Lepera, can I drop Gardner Minshew to pick up Ryan Tannehill?
Not now.
Because of
the uncertainty.
Let's say we know they're playing. Let's say we know that the Titans are.
I prefer Gardner Minshew this week. Better matchup.
Okay. And long term, does it matter to you, or they're pretty much the same?
They're in the streaming conversation, so I don't want to think long term with these quarterbacks, right? If I'm in a 1 quarterback league, I just want to play the streaming game, and I'll take it week to week.
I love it. That's the correct answer. I do have Minshew ahead, I'm sure, most weeks. And for the rest of the season, they're pretty much there. But they're both good options. So the Dan Harris motto, when you have one of those, do whatever you want.
Just do
whatever you want. Whatever you want. You like Tannehill, you can do Tannehill. I won't yell at you for it. There are all these things. I joke about that. Really is. If I don't have super strong feelings about it, if guys are really close, if you have a preference one way or the other, just do it. We all have our own preferences. That's fine. That's one where it's literally like, whatever, scoop, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Sony Michelle from, I'm not sure whether
you reading YouTube usernames might be my new favorite thing.
There are 2 parts to it. Number 1, I'm not always sure how to pronounce it. Number 2, I'm not sure if they're dirty or not. So I want to make sure that I'm not going to say anything that's going to be replayed by all of us while we're doing our funny things. whoever, which I'm not going to say your name. Sony Michel was dropped. Is he worth an ad?
No.
Same thing as all Patriots running backs. I mean, you're not going to ever feel comfortable starting him. So I agree with that. This has got to be a special for us. Crash Horizon, drop T.Y. Hilton. Would you drop T.Y. Hilton, Yates? He's out there. You're not picking him up.
I have been playing that up on the podcast. I've been like, just taking it.
Oh, I know.
So
I saw it. I was there.
So no, I don't think that I would necessarily drop him because you are talking about, again, matchups against Cleveland, Cincinnati in the next couple of weeks. Like those are fine matchups for him. I'm not super excited about him against Chicago. And he hasn't necessarily done anything. So I think if you can drop him for, let's say that we don't have the concerns of Minnesota playing this week. If I was faced with T.Y. Hilton was still somehow on my roster, which just wouldn't happen. But if he was, and I could drop him for Justin Jefferson, I would be doing that because I think Justin Jefferson has more of a ceiling. He's on the way up versus T.Y. Hilton trending down. So that's where I would go.
If you'd like to hear our thoughts on T.Y. Hilton, tune into any of our last 6 podcasts and you will have them. I'm not dropping T.Y. Hilton. Nope. Especially not now with everybody else, all the other wide receivers. What type of player would you offer for Joe Mixon right now? I mean, we've talked about him as a little bit of a buy low. These are always very difficult, Yates.
These are very, very difficult.
But here I'm gonna list a couple of guys. Would you trade, and we may have talked about this on the podcast, so I apologize. Would you trade James Robinson to get Joe Mixon?
I think I would.
Okay.
I think I would.
Would you trade Kareem Hunt? Let's go half PPR formats to get Joe Mixon.
This is super close. In rest of season rankings, I have Mixon at 15 and I have Kareem Hunt at 18. Okay. So they're in the same tier. I don't think that it's necessarily like a huge, in that instance, it's not like, I'm saying like, what's the benefit? What's the benefit to making that trade if they're in the same tier? Right. Okay. So I think Mixon can get it figured out and can be a top 5 back once he gets the usage and starts finding the end zone. But for right now, Kareem Hunt's a more valuable asset.
Darrell Henderson or Joe Mixon?
Joe Mixon.
DJ Moore or Joe Mixon?
Joe Mixon.
Okay. Angel, we talked about this a little bit. Is Damian Harris worth a pickup? Not really, right? I mean,
not really.
Okay. Tags was a little more excited about him to be as
Tags
fair as
has been excited about Damian Harris all offseason. So I think that's why. But outside, like, this is a messy backfield. It's just not really one that I want to invest in.
Just avoid. Jack Delaney, Allen Robinson, can he keep this up and be a wide receiver 1? I mean, to be clear, Allen Robinson hasn't dominated all season long. He had a quiet game, but are you excited about Allen Robinson going forward?
Yeah, big game last week against Atlanta. Should have had an even bigger game.
Yes.
So I think looking with Nick Foles as the quarterback moving forward in this offense, it's going to be an offense that stays on schedule. It's going to help out everything. And Allen Robinson should be a reliable fantasy asset moving forward. If you were able to buy low on him to begin the year, congratulations, because I think you got a locked and loaded top 10 wide receiver moving forward.
Cosign everything that Yates said. Sir Don Trip, I need to replace Dallas Goedert. Could Jimmy Graham be a good replacement?
He's touchdown or bust. So with any of these guys, if you roll him in and he finds the end zone, you're going to be happy. If he doesn't find the end zone, you're not going to be happy. So that's kind of the range, though. Outside of outside of like the locked and loaded top 12 tight ends, you're kind of playing this guessing game. So that's kind of the situation that you're put in. If you lost Dallas Goedert, then that's probably the best available option.
Rest of season, Eric Ebron or Jimmy Graham?
Oh, gross.
Correct. That's what I asked. Gross questions. We're talking about Jimmy Graham. It should be Graham.
I mean, I'm going to go Jimmy Graham because I think he's more involved in the red zone.
Yeah, no, I have Eric Ebron ahead. I think Ebron is the guy. If so, out of curiosity, if they're both available, then are you picking up Jimmy Graham over Eric Ebron this week? Because he was listed as really your top guy.
Well, it goes with like the same thing as a quarterback streamer. At that point, you're streaming the tight end position and you're playing matchups. So I will roll out Eric Ebron this week because if Deontay Johnson misses, it's a great matchup for him. And I think that he'll be involved. And if I want someone who can be a potential long-term asset, but I'm not looking at Jimmy Graham in that way either. Right. Yeah. So I'll play the tight end streaming game.
Yeah. I will give a little bit more of a definitive answer. I do not think Jimmy Graham is a good replacement. I think that you can probably find 10 other guys on your waiver wire. I'm just not willing to trust him right now.
Well, if he does again, add Logan Thomas. So
I'm going right after those terrible targets with Logan Thomas. Don't mess with me. Okay. How do you feel about, I'm sorry, this is from Edward DeFreitas. How do you feel about Devonta Freeman this week? The Giants are playing the Rams.
Not great, but
No,
if you there are going to be a lot of people playing Devonta Freeman this
it's
week
true.
because you absolutely have to
Yeah.
with not only just injuries in general, but then also this uncertainty with these 4 teams. So yeah, Devonta Freeman, wide receiver, running back 3 right now. That he could move up, obviously, if some of these other guys miss.
Yeah, I mean, it could be somebody who you start this week, but I am not excited about starting Devonta Freeman this week, next week, or the week after, or any week this season. John Hanson, do you trade James Conner for Jonathan Taylor?
I think you can. James Conner obviously has had the injury concerns hanging over his shoulder. Jonathan Taylor is one of the most durable backs that we've ever seen come out of college. So he doesn't really have that hanging over his head, and he's getting the majority of the carries in Indianapolis. So he's getting a ton of work. So I think you can.
I think more than you can, you should. I think Tags got into everybody's head when he was like, I didn't like the way Jonathan Taylor looked while he was going for, a touchdown and 60 yards,
Right.
being in a disinterested game because they dominated the Jets from the word go. Stop it with this Jonathan Taylor nonsense. You trade for Jonathan Taylor. Evan Weissert, would you prefer David Johnson or Robbie Anderson rest of season? Let's say both are flex. Robbie Anderson for you, huh?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to side with David Johnson because I'm going to side with the running back almost always in a situation like that. Anderson has impressed me, and I will admit that I was wrong on that one. I liked Samuel coming in. You liked Anderson. You were definitely right. I was definitely wrong, but I still prefer David Johnson. I do think that better days are ahead for him now with the schedule lighting up. Rafael Tirado, bench security. Would you prefer to have Mike Williams or Sammy Watkins?
Sammy Watkins right now.
Yeah.
Tyrod Taylor was the one who was looking Mike Williams' way, and we just don't know when Tyrod's going to be back in the lineup. So I'll go with Sammy Watkins. It's wide receiver 2 in the best offense in the league.
I'm very encouraged with Watkins. I was very encouraged with what I saw this week. We talked about it earlier today on the podcast, which you guys will hear later today. He did just kind of fall down after he got the ball, but that's fair. He was just coming out of the concussion protocol, but he led them in snaps. He led the Chiefs receivers in snaps. I think he's going to be heavily involved. Don't forget, Mike Williams is battling an injury right now. Mike Williams is just not a guy who I'm willing to go after. We don't know. I'm also not willing to just say when Tyrod Taylor is in there that it's Mike Williams' show. It's one game. When people were really worried about Keenan Allen, it's one game. I haven't even played a preseason game. Let's see how it comes out. So Mike Williams, not a guy who I really like. This one should be pretty easy, I think. Observed seizure. Again, I don't know these names. Who should I start? Hayden Hurst or Jimmy Graham? I just assume that it's Hayden Hurst without too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a question now because Hayden Hurst only saw 2 targets last week. 1 catch turned it into a touchdown, right? So, but yeah, no, you play Hayden Hurst moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Curtis Kashara, do you keep or do you drop Alexander Madison?
You drop him if you need someone, right? If you need someone this week, let's say that, you're faced with the situation of you need a running back. Carlos Hyde is available on waivers and you have to choose someone from your, roster to drop. Then you drop Alexander Madison to go get Carlos Hyde because you need that player. Alexander Madison has always been someone that you keep on the end of your bench as insurance for Dalvin Cook, but he's not going to have any standalone value.
Yeah. It depends on your roster situation. Just like you said, you are trying to keep these high-end handcuffs because they could be league winners if something happens to the guy in front of them. But for the most part, you got to move on. Tim Mendiola, do you think AB is a good stash? Antonio Brown, I assume that they're talking about. Good stash? No. Correct.
No.
Not a difficult question. Just do not stash Antonio Brown. I highly doubt he's going to play this year. Etienne Boucher, what do I do with Miles Sanders and Todd Gurley? Are people worried about Miles Sanders? Did I miss that?
Yeah, Miles Sanders. So I saw a report. Man, I wish I could remember who it was on Twitter that put this out. But Miles Sanders was dealing with fatigue at the end in the second half last week. So that's why we didn't see him have as big of a game as we were all expecting. So he's still trying to get back up to game speed after missing all of training camp, essentially. And coming off of that injury. So he's still trying to get up to speed and he was dealing with fatigue last week. So no, you should not be worried about Miles Sanders. Todd Gurley is someone that you play as long as he's healthy and you expect low end RB2 numbers.
Yeah. Do you think people were asking about this? Do you think there's any chance that Brian Hill is going to carve out a bigger role? I mean, he looked better
He
did
did
look better, right? Do you think he can carve out a bigger role than Gurley going forward, especially with the fact that you have to assume that Dan Quinn is going to be fired? I say that with the understanding that we were having this exact same conversation every week last year, and he didn't, and then the team turned around. So maybe it won't be. But if he is fired, who knows what a new regime might think. So do you think there's any chance of Hill working in a bigger role?
There's always a possibility, but moving forward, as long as until we see it happen with Todd Gurley, he's in too dynamic of an offense to ignore, to sit, right? Like, he's going to get the touches, he's going to get the opportunity, and he has the goal line potential, right, in this offense. So, I think with Atlanta last week, Brian Hill's long touchdown, it was a touchdown that came from 35 yards out. So it's like, if they got down to the 1, 2, 3 yard line, it's Todd Gurley who's coming in to take that goal line carry. So yeah, you can't ignore that potential.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about Todd Gurley just because you saw his lack of involvement in the passing game last year, but you realize he ran a ton of routes. Like, it wasn't that the game plan changed. They just weren't targeting him, and he's barely involved in the passing game right now this year, which sucks. That is really a huge cap on his value. With that said, like you said, he's a guy who's basically getting 20 touches essentially per game, and he's going to be the goal line back. So concerned about him. Yes, I don't think Brian Hill is going to overtake him, but he is going to eat into his work. So low end RB2. And at that point, you take what you can get. There just aren't that many guys who are locked in that workload. Okay. Great waiver wire show. Yates, as always, we have reached our capacity for talking this today. So hopefully we get a couple day break till maybe Friday. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't. Click the like button. That really helps us out. But again, subscribe. So you make sure you click the notification button. You'll be there for all our live streams that we do on Sunday morning. We will be back with videos later this week, and Yates doing a start sit show. We'll talk to you again then.